Hey, I'm Andrew Joseph Keith. I'm an artist and sculptor, and in this video I wanted to talk about my #1 recommendation for a book that you can get if you're interested in a book on general sculpting principles. So this is a question I've been asked a few times on book recommendations for sculptors. I highly recommend this one. This is Modeling and Sculpting the Human Figure by Eduard Lanteri, and you can usually find this used on eBay or other marketplaces for very little. I think I got this for under $10. It's just a great sculpting book in general. I'm an artist and online sculpting instructor, and so I'm really interested in teaching and understanding sculpting principles. And this is one of the best books that I've come across, and it's a recommendation that I've had from other professional sculptors. And it's just a really good reference for general sculpting principles. I don't know, can you hear the rain outside? It's a rainy day. The rain on that tin roof sounds nice. So hopefully that's not too distracting. Now I'm going to switch the camera around so that you can kind of look over my shoulder, and we'll talk about some of the things that I like about this book. One of the quotes from the beginning of the book that stood out to me is, "This work shows how one develops the sculptor's logic of organic form, a logic that deals not only in words but in organic shapes and anatomical function of movement, expression, and relationship." Here's another quote that I liked. "And as drawing is the principal foundation of sculpture, and a good sculptural work depends largely on good drawing, the student should draw as much as, if not more than, a student of painting, which unfortunately is not always done. I begin this guide always addressing myself to a student who is capable of seeing a line and executing it properly." So then he goes through and outlines things like tools, making a stand for sculpture. A lot of these tools are like traditional old-fashioned tools that you might not see as much now. And this book, I believe that the artist is primarily working in water-based clay. So in my sculpting courses, I teach generally with polymer clay or oil and wax-based clay, because those don't dry out. But this one, he's showing you how to work using water-based clay. Here's a skull reference where he shows the angles of the skull and the skull from below. This is a very important angle for sculptors. Here you can just see how egg-like the shape of the skull is, that it tapers towards that front plane of the face. And we talk about this taper when we make a simple block in for the head. It's a wedge shape that tapers, and then the widest point of the skull is here towards the back. We usually don't see the skull from this angle, but that's why these types of visuals are so helpful for sculptors, because it really gives you an understanding that you wouldn't get from any other angle. Goes over some basic anatomy with diagrams, and what I really like is his approach to sculpting itself. And so here he shows the rough out, block out stage, and you can see how he's thinking about these forms, these simple forms, and then honing those in as he refines and defines the details. The rain is really coming down. Here's a look at the nose, how he approaches that. And here's the ear. And you can see he just really understands the form and represents it in a way that's, I feel, easier to follow. And even just for these references, I think it's worth picking up this book to try to practice sculpting the ear this way. You can see that the depths are very much pushed in. The inside parts of the ear, he really pushes those in, and there's a nice flow to it. The anatomy's in place, somewhat simplified and exaggerated in some of the forms, but just really nicely done, and a great example of how to approach feature studies of parts of the portrait. And there's that ear. There's the eye, a tricky feature for anybody. Shows how he approaches that. Shows you his process for building armatures, for locating the features, and how to get a simple block in started. It's basically a foundation to draw in the features. Here you can see how things start to develop on his portrait. Lots of character. Tips on modeling. Just really fascinating. Here's some other portraits. Look at that. You can really see that he's takes his craft seriously, and his understanding really shows through, his understanding of the forms and the anatomy. Here he shows how you might go about building an armature. This is a little bit different than my method that I teach in my courses, but look, this is old enough that it says that that you use lead rod. Now we don't use lead so much, more aluminum, because lead is nasty and toxic. But that just kind of dates this book. It's back when they were using lead in sculptures, showing that gesture, how it flows depending on the pose, and the contrapposto, the shoulders going one way, the hips going another way. Really nicely illustrated. And then there you can see that again, the nice curve of the spine. And if you dropped a plumb line, what that would look like. So a lot of the principles that are taught in this book are the same principles that I teach in my online courses. And so a lot of the inspiration for those online courses came from this book because it's just so clearly illustrated and designed, and the instruction is just really good. Going over anatomy. Here he shows how he'd start a figure, very simplified and thin, how I recommend people start their sculptures, and focusing on the primary forms, simplified version of the figure, and then on top of that you can come in and add the details afterward. Really impressive understanding of anatomy and form. Then he goes in and does an écorché or muscle study. This is something where I'd like to do a course just focusing on this study of the muscles. And look at that back view, all of those muscles in place. Really nice anatomy study with some diagrams that go over the anatomy. He has a section that goes over bas relief or low relief sculpture and technique for that. Talks about fabric and sculpting fabric, the eye of the fold, and tips on representing folds in cloth and how that extrapolates to folds everywhere in skin and cloth and all kinds of materials. But you really notice it in fabric. There he shows how to do a fabric drapery study and how to start to develop that. Look at that. Just really impressive sculpture study. Just amazing. Look at that. This is a clay copy. That looks like a photograph of an actual piece of drapery, but it's a study that he's developed in clay. So that's the cloth that he was studying, and then he did this study, this clay study, based off of this cloth that he was observing in drapery on the figure. Some relief and coins and some other examples. It's really coming down out there. Here you can see some of the areas where the roof still needs to be touched up. We'll get that fixed before we do the in-person workshop. So anyway, really great book. My number one recommendation for any sculptor, just a book that you should have. It's a classic, and so be sure to check it out if you're interested. If I can find a link to it, I'll put that in the description below. And if you're interested in joining an online course that basically takes the principles in this book and then turns them into guided video lessons with assignments and demos and things like that, then the Figure Sculpting Fundamentals course is that course. It's everything I wish I knew when I started sculpting, and it's a great resource for anybody interested in traditional figurative sculpting principles. There's also a portrait sculpting course and a hand sculpting course. Those dive deeper into anatomy and structure and things like that. If you've already taken the Figure Sculpting Fundamentals course, you might consider joining those courses as well. If you'd like to come to my home studio, this studio space, and sculpt with me in Iowa, then there's going to be a workshop in June. Signups are available now, and so there's a link in the description if you're interested in that. I'm really excited. It should be a really fun experience for anybody that can make it. So if you're able to travel and come to my home state of Iowa, and if you'd like to have that experience of sculpting with me in person and meeting other like-minded sculptors and just having a good time and creating something interesting and worthwhile and learning a lot, then I hope you'll join me for that workshop, the AJK Atelier workshop. All right, thank you for watching. Stay creative, stay productive. Hopefully I'll see you again soon in another video.